Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. My friend ordered Uber of the deep web to prank me. I ended up in Area 51 on an alien project. Alright, let me start off by saying that I'm not usually one for posting my life online, especially not on Reddit. But what happened to me was so insane that I just need to share it somewhere. This whole thing is a nightmare that started off as a prank, but it ended up going way too far. So I'm at my buddy Jake's place on a Friday night. We were doing what we usually do, drinking a few beers, watching stupid videos, and trying to out-prank each other. You know, normal stuff. Jake has always been into these crazy pranks, pushing boundaries just to get a reaction. He once dressed up as a clown and scared the hell out of our entire neighborhood, so I should have seen this coming. Anyway, Jake tells me he's got something special planned. He was grinning like a madman, and I figured it was just some lame prank, maybe a jump scare or something. But no, Jake's got something next level in mind. He starts talking about the dark web like it's a playground. I'd heard about it, sure, but never in my wildest dreams did I think he'd go there for a joke. Jake starts typing away on his laptop, showing me all these sketchy sites with black backgrounds and white text, places where you can buy like stolen credit cards and Hitman services. I was starting to feel uneasy about the whole thing. I mean, this was real illegal stuff. But Jake just laughed it off, saying he found this thing called Uber of the deep web. According to him, it was like a rideshare service, but completely unregulated, with no questions asked. Basically, you get in the car, and the driver takes you wherever you want. Or so he said. I was skeptical and more than a little creeped out. I told him it was a bad idea, but Jake, being Jake, was already 2 steps ahead of me. Before I knew it, he had already put in our address and set up a ride. I thought he was joking until I saw the confirmation on his screen. Your ride will arrive in 10 minutes. My stomach dropped. I was freaked out, and I told Jake to cancel it, but he was too busy laughing his ass off. He kept saying it would be hilarious, that the driver would just be some weird dude who'd take us around the block, but the pit in my stomach wouldn't go away. I had a feeling this was about to go very wrong. 10 minutes later, there's a knock at the door. We both froze. Jake was still chuckling as he opened it, but his laugh died immediately. Standing there was this tall, thin guy dressed in black from head to toe. He had on these reflective sunglasses, and I swear he didn't blink. His face was gaunt, with a kind of hollow look, like he hadn't slept in days. Something about him just screamed danger. Jake, still trying to keep it light, said, "Hey man, you alright?" The guy just nodded once, not saying a word. He gestured for us to follow him. Against my better judgment, and with Jake nudging me along, I followed them out to the car. The car was this old beat-up sedan that looked like it hadn't passed an inspection in years. The inside smelled like cigarettes and something metallic, like a tool shop. I hesitated at the door, but Jake was already inside, so I climbed in next to him. The driver didn't say a word. He just started driving, taking turns and exits that didn't make any sense. I kept asking Jake what the hell was happening, but he just shrugged, trying to play it cool. "It's part of the experience," he whispered, though he looked less sure than before. After about half an hour of driving, we were way out of town in the middle of nowhere. There were no streetlights, just empty roads and darkness. I was seriously freaking out by now, whispering to Jake that this was a bad idea and we should find a way to get out. Jake, now visibly nervous, agreed. But then the car stopped. The driver turned to us, and for the first time, he spoke. His voice was low, almost mechanical. "End of the line," he said. Jake tried to laugh it off, asking, "Where are we, man? This isn't funny anymore." The driver just got out of the car, opened my door, and motioned for me to get out. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to, but he was insistent. He didn't even look at Jake, just me. There was something unsettling in his gaze, like he could see right through me. Once we were out of the car, I looked around. We were in front of this chain-link fence, and beyond it, I could see a large compound with lights shining everywhere. It hit me then. This wasn't just any place. I'd heard stories, rumors really, but never thought I'd see it for myself. This looked like Area 51, the infamous secret military base, the stuff of conspiracy theories. The driver pointed towards the fence and said, "Go through there." I looked at Jake, who was pale and speechless for once. We both realized we were way out of our depth. I didn't know what was waiting for us, but I knew we didn't have a choice. Part of me wanted to believe this was still a prank, that maybe Jake had set this up to scare me. But deep down, I knew this was real, and we were in serious trouble. With the driver standing there, eyes fixed on me, we started walking toward the fence. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I had a gut-wrenching feeling that it wasn't going to be good. The air was cold, and the silence was oppressive. Every step felt like it might be my last. What had started as a stupid prank was quickly turning into a nightmare. As we approached the fence, I could feel the tension mounting. We were heading into the unknown, and there was no turning back. We stood at the edge of the fence, peering into the unknown. Beyond it lay what I could only assume was the notorious Area 51. The place seemed deserted, except for the bright, blinding lights, illuminating everything in harsh white. The driver stayed behind, still as a statue, watching us like he was the gatekeeper of this nightmare. I nudged Jake, whispering, "Man, we gotta get out of here." But before he could answer, the driver moved back toward the car and drove off, leaving us stranded in the darkness. It was just us and the fence now. No turning back. "Maybe we should just try and walk back," Jake muttered, though his voice was shaking. But we both knew that wasn't an option. We were miles from civilization, and the thought of wandering the desert in pitch black was terrifying. Our only choice was to push forward. Reluctantly, we climbed the fence, trying not to make any noise. My hand shook as I gripped the cold metal, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. Once we were over, there was no going back. We'd stepped into the unknown, and I was scared out of my mind. Inside, the compound was eerily quiet. We moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, hoping no one would spot us. I was half expecting alarms to blare, guards to swarm us, but it was dead silent. Too silent. Every step echoed, amplifying the anxiety that clawed at my insides. We moved past a series of low, unmarked buildings, windows dark and unwelcoming. They seemed to stare at us, blank and hollow. I wanted to turn and run, but there was nowhere to go. Jake and I shared a look. I was as freaked out as I was, his bravado from earlier completely gone. As we rounded a corner, we stumbled upon something that stopped us cold. There was a group of figures standing in a clearing, motionless under the harsh glare of a spotlight. It took me a moment to realize they weren't people. They were mannequins, all posed in different positions, dressed in military uniforms. It was like some twisted art exhibit, the kind that sends a shiver down your spine and plants itself in your nightmares. Why would they have something like this here? Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. I shook my head. I had no answers, only questions that multiplied the longer we stayed. We skirted around the mannequins, keeping our distance. There was something incredibly unnerving about them, their lifeless eyes seeming to follow us as we moved. Then we heard it, a low humming noise that seemed to resonate through the ground. It was subtle at first, but it grew louder as we continued deeper into the complex. I couldn't place the source, but it was pulling us in, like moths to a flame. Maybe it's some kind of generator, Jake suggested, trying to make sense of it. Yeah, maybe, I replied, though I wasn't convinced. There was something otherworldly about it, a vibration that seemed to settle in my bones. We followed the sound until we reached a building that looked different from the rest. It was larger, with thick steel doors and a keypad lock. This was the only place that seemed to have any life to it, even if it was just the mechanical hum. Jake, ever the risk-taker, moved toward the keypad, running his fingers over it. Think you can crack it? I asked, half joking, half hoping we'd find a way out of this mess. He gave a nervous chuckle. Yeah, I wish, but I've seen enough movies to know it's not impossible. He began randomly pressing buttons, and to my shock, the door clicked open. I stared at him, eyes wide. No way that just worked. Jake shrugged, though his face showed he was just as surprised. Beginner's luck, I guess. We pushed the door open, and the sound of the humming intensified. It was almost deafening now, filling the space around us like a physical presence. Inside, the room was filled with strange equipment, all flashing lights and screens. The air was cool, sterile, and it smelled faintly of chemicals and something burnt. In the center of the room was a large cylindrical tank filled with a thick, green liquid. Floating inside was something that made my stomach lurch. It was a creature, something not from this world. Its skin was translucent, its limbs elongated, and its eyes, those eyes were open, unblinking, staring at us with a look that seemed almost alive. What the hell is that? Jake breathed, backing away. I couldn't speak. I was frozen, captivated by the sight of this alien creature. It was like every conspiracy theory I'd ever heard was true, and we just stumbled into the middle of it. Suddenly, alarms blared, and the room was bathed in red light. We'd been found out. I grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him toward the door. We had to get out of there before whoever was in charge came for us. We sprinted through the compound, adrenaline pumping, not caring about staying hidden anymore. Behind us, I could hear shouts, the barking of orders, and the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the ground. We were being chased. Panic took over, and all I could think about was escape. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how we'd gotten into this mess and how we could possibly get out. We zigzagged through the buildings, not even sure where we were heading, just desperate to put as much distance as possible between us and whatever nightmare we'd unleashed. As we rounded another corner, Jake tripped, hitting the ground hard. I turned back, helping him to his feet. There was fear in his eyes I had never seen before, and it mirrored my own. We have to keep going, I shouted, practically dragging him along, but it was no use. The shouts were getting closer, the lights sweeping the area and illuminating everything in a harsh glare. In a last-ditch effort, we ducked into a small maintenance shed, pressing ourselves into the shadows. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. Jake was breathing hard, eyes wide with terror. We waited, barely daring to breathe, as footsteps approached. Through a crack in the shed door, I saw a group of men in black uniforms, weapons drawn, moving methodically through the area. I could feel my heart hammering in my throat, every second stretching into eternity. And then, just as quickly as they'd appeared, they moved on, their voices fading into the distance. We stayed there for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to even hope we might escape. Finally, when the silence became unbearable, we crept out, hearts still pounding. The compound seemed deserted again, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. "We need to find a way out of here," I whispered urgently. Jake nodded, his face grim. With no clear plan, we started moving again, sticking to the shadows and praying we wouldn't run into more guards. The night stretched on, an endless labyrinth of fear and uncertainty. We were still trapped, still hunted, and I had no idea what would happen if they caught us. But one thing was clear. This was no prank. This was real, and we were in serious danger. I had no idea how we'd survive the night, or if we'd ever make it out of here alive. But we had to try. Whatever waited for us beyond the fence, it had to be better than the nightmare we'd stumbled into. We were in deep trouble. The reality of our situation hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't some elaborate prank gone wrong. It was a life or death situation. We needed to get out of Area 51, and we needed to do it fast. As we crept through the shadows, our minds raced, trying to piece together a plan. We managed to find our way back to the fence we had climbed earlier, but it wasn't as simple as retracing our steps. The guards were still out there, patrolling the area like bloodhounds on a scent. We had to stay low, stay quiet, and pray we didn't get caught. "Maybe we can find another way out," Jake whispered, his voice trembling. He was trying to stay positive, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I nodded, though my own fear was clawing at my insides. I didn't have any brilliant ideas, but I knew staying put was not an option. We had to keep moving. We started circling the perimeter, searching for a weak spot, some way to slip through unnoticed. The place was a maze of barbed wire and surveillance cameras, each one a potential death sentence if we were caught. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and every sound made me jump. As we moved, we stumbled upon a section of the fence that seemed less guarded. It was near a cluster of old storage units, the kind that looked like they hadn't been used in years. We huddled behind them, catching our breath and trying to calm our racing hearts. "Maybe we can climb over here," Jake suggested, eyeing the fence warily. I hesitated. "What if they see us?" He shrugged, though I could tell he was scared too. "We don't have a choice, man. We have to try something." I swallowed hard, nodding. He was right. We couldn't just sit around waiting to get caught. We had to take a risk, no matter how dangerous it seemed. I boosted Jake up first, helping him scramble over the fence as quietly as possible. My hands shook with every movement, adrenaline making it hard to concentrate. Once he was on the other side, I started climbing up myself. That's when I heard the footsteps, a soft, deliberate crunch of gravel that sent a shiver down my spine. My heart leapt into my throat as I froze, halfway up the fence, praying I was just imagining things. But the footsteps were real, getting closer and closer. My mind screamed at me to move, to get over the fence, before it was too late. But my body wouldn't respond, frozen in terror. "Dude, hurry!" Jake hissed from the other side, his voice barely audible. Somehow, I managed to pull myself over, landing hard on the other side with a muted thud. We crouched low, holding our breath, waiting for the inevitable. The footsteps paused, and I could see the beam of a flashlight sweeping the area. It passed over us once, then again, and I was sure we were done for. But then, miraculously, the light moved on, and the footsteps faded into the distance. We stayed still for several minutes, hearts pounding, afraid to move. Finally, Jake tugged on my sleeve. "Come on, we need to go." I nodded, and we slipped away, moving as fast as we dared. The desert stretched out before us, an endless sea of darkness. We had no idea where we were going, but at least we were out of the compound. The fear of getting caught still loomed over us, but now we had a new fear: the vast, empty desert. We had no supplies, no water, and no idea how far we were from civilization. The moon cast eerie shadows over the sand, transforming the landscape into something out of a nightmare. We trudged on, exhaustion creeping in as the adrenaline faded. My mind was a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. How had a stupid prank led us to this? How were we going to survive? We kept moving, driven by the hope of finding a road, a town, anything that meant safety. But as the night dragged on, that hope began to dwindle. My throat was dry, and every step was a struggle. Then just when I thought we couldn't go on any longer, we stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. There, half buried in the sand, was what looked like a human skull. It was old, weathered, but unmistakable. "Holy shit," Jake whispered, his voice a mix of awe and horror. I stared at it, the grim reminder of just how dangerous our situation was. This desert could easily swallow us up, just like it had swallowed whoever this poor soul was. We moved on, our spirits dampened by the grim discovery. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every sound a potential danger. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, even out here in the middle of nowhere. As dawn approached, the sky turning a pale gray, we finally spotted something in the distance. It was a road, just a narrow strip of asphalt cutting through the desert, but it was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. We stumbled toward it, exhausted but filled with renewed hope. If we could find the road, maybe we could find help, find a way back to safety. But as we approached, I noticed something that made my heart sink. There, parked on the side of the road, was a black SUV, the kind you'd see in government movies. Two men stood beside it, dressed in dark suits, sunglasses perched on their noses despite the early hour. Jake and I exchanged a glance, our relief turning to dread. We'd escaped the compound, but it seemed we hadn't escaped its reach. Before we could decide what to do, one of the men spotted us. He nudged his partner, and they started toward us, their movements calm and deliberate. We were too tired to run, too desperate to hide. All we could do was stand there, waiting for whatever fate had in store. When they reached us, one of the men spoke, his voice smooth and practiced. "You boys have been busy tonight." I tried to speak, but my mouth was too dry, my mind too frazzled. Jake managed a weak nod, but it was clear we were no match for them. The man sighed, almost as if he were disappointed. "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have seen what you saw." Panic rose in me again, but I couldn't move, couldn't fight. They had us cornered, and we were too exhausted to resist. Then, to my surprise, the man gestured to the SUV. "Get in. We'll take you back." Jake and I exchanged a bewildered look. Why were they helping us? It didn't make sense, but we didn't have much choice. Reluctantly, we climbed into the SUV, sinking into the leather seats. The men got in after us, and soon we were driving away, leaving the desert and its secrets behind. As we drove, the man explained that we'd stumbled into something we weren't supposed to see. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. Part of me didn't want to know. Eventually, we reached the outskirts of a small town, the sun rising behind us. They dropped us off at a gas station, leaving us with a warning. Forget everything you saw. Don't come back. We nodded, too grateful and terrified to argue. As they drove away, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear. We were safe for now, but the events of that night would haunt me forever. Jake and I made our way home, exhausted but alive. We never spoke of what happened, and I've kept it to myself until now. Even though we escaped, I can't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, is still watching. I don't know what we uncovered that night, but I know one thing. Some secrets are better left buried. Returning home after that insane night was surreal. Everything felt off, like I was living in a dream that I couldn't wake up from. I thought we were finally safe, but the events at Area 51 left a deep mark. It was like an itch in the back of my mind that I couldn't scratch, always reminding me that some things were best left undiscovered. I tried to get back to normal life, but it was harder than I expected. My sleep was plagued by nightmares of the desert and that alien creature in the tank, its unblinking eyes staring straight into my soul. I kept seeing those mannequins too, positioned in their lifeless poses under the spotlight, like they were waiting for something or someone. Jake seemed to handle things better than I did. He brushed it off as an epic story to tell one day, but I could see the tension in his eyes whenever someone mentioned the word prank. We both knew it had gone way beyond that, and there was an unspoken agreement between us never to talk about it. Despite my efforts to move on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. I'd catch glimpses of black SUVs parked down the street, or see men in dark suits lingering just a little too long near my apartment building. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, but I wasn't so sure. About a week after our return, I got a package delivered to my apartment. There was no return address, just a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. I hesitated before opening it, fearing what might be inside. Jake was with me when I finally gathered the courage to unwrap it. Inside was a single piece of paper, blank except for a short, handwritten note. "You were warned." My stomach churned as I read it aloud, and Jake's face went pale. "What the hell does that mean?" he whispered, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, fear gripping me. It felt like a threat, a reminder that we weren't as free as we thought. Someone out there knew what we had seen, and they wanted to make sure we didn't forget. We debated calling the police, but what could we say? That we'd broken into a top-secret government facility and stumbled upon something we weren't supposed to see. No one would believe us, and even if they did, it would probably just make things worse. In the following days, the feeling of being watched intensified. I started noticing strange things around my apartment. Small, almost imperceptible changes. I'd find objects moved from where I'd left them, doors slightly ajar when I was sure I'd closed them. It was like someone was trying to send a message, letting me know they could get to me whenever they wanted. Jake was experiencing the same things. He called me one night, voice shaky, saying he'd found his laptop on, despite having turned it off before going to bed. His webcam light was blinking, and I could hear the fear in his voice. Dude, what do we do? He asked, sounding more vulnerable than I'd ever heard him. I don't know, I replied honestly. Maybe we just lay low, don't make waves, try to act normal. But acting normal was easier said than done. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every sound, every shadow. I started having panic attacks, heart racing, hands shaking uncontrollably. The stress of keeping everything bottled up was eating away at me. It all came to a head one night when I woke up to find someone standing at the foot of my bed. My heart stopped as I fumbled for the light switch, my mind screaming at me to run, to fight, to do something. But when the light flicked on, there was no one there. I sat up, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. I couldn't tell if I'd been dreaming or if it was real, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Desperate for answers, I decided to visit Jake the next day. Maybe we could figure something out together, come up with a plan to make all this stop. But when I got to his apartment, I found the door ajar, the lock broken. Jake? I called, stepping inside cautiously. The place was a mess, like it had been ransacked. Papers were strewn everywhere, furniture overturned. Panic clawed at my chest as I searched for him, calling his name over and over. But there was no sign of him, just the chaotic aftermath of whatever had happened. Then I saw it. Another note, taped to his bedroom mirror. The same handwriting, the same ominous message. You were warned. I felt the world spin around me, my heart pounding in my ears. I sank to the floor, fear and despair washing over me. Jake was gone, and I had no idea where or why. The realization hit me hard. We'd pushed too far, uncovered something we weren't supposed to, and now we were paying the price. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over, and I was next. I knew I had to get out of there, had to find some way to stay safe. But how could I run from something I didn't understand, from people who seemed to know my every move? With no other options, I gathered my things and left town, driving until I ran out of gas. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do, but I knew I couldn't stay there, couldn't risk being found. As I drove, my mind replayed everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was still out there, somewhere, and that maybe, just maybe, I could find him. But for now, all I could do was keep moving, keep running, and hope that one day I'd finally be free of this nightmare. I drove until exhaustion took over, pulling into a run-down motel off the interstate, somewhere that felt like the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where people come to disappear. I checked in under a fake name, paying cash, and barricaded myself in the room, pulling the curtains tight against the outside world. Every sound set me on edge. The creak of footsteps outside my door, the distant hum of cars on the highway. It all felt like a prelude to something terrible. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever, but I needed time to think, to plan. Sleep was elusive, but when I finally succumbed, it was restless and filled with haunting dreams of Area 51 and that creature in the tank. The message, "You were warned," echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. Days passed in a blur. I tried to piece together what I knew, scribbling notes on scrap paper, trying to make sense of it all. But the more I thought about it, the more tangled the web became. There were too many unknowns, too many threats I couldn't see. I spent my days watching the news, hoping for any mention of Jake, any clue as to what had happened to him. But there was nothing, just the endless churn of everyday life, oblivious to the chaos that had upended mine. Then one night, I got a call. I didn't recognize the number, but but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. There was a pause. Then a familiar voice came through, weak and strained. "It's Jake." Relief flooded through me, mixed with a fresh wave of fear. "Jake, where are you? What happened?" "I don't have much time," he said, his voice barely audible over the crackling line. "They took me somewhere. I don't know where, but I got away." My heart raced. "How did you escape?" "It doesn't matter," he replied quickly. "They're coming for you too. You need to leave, get somewhere safe." "Safe?" I echoed, panic rising. "Where the hell is safe from this?" "There's a place," Jake said, urgency in his voice. "I wrote it down, left it for you. But they're watching, man. Always watching." Before I could ask more, the line went dead. I stared at the phone, a cold sweat breaking out over my skin. Jake was alive, but for how long? And what did he mean about leaving something for me? I tore through my bag, searching for anything that might be a clue. My hands shook as I rifled through papers, receipts, and then I found it. A crumpled piece of paper at the bottom. On it was a single word, Crossroads. I had no idea what it meant, but it was the only lead I had. I knew I had to find it, wherever it was, whatever it meant. If Jake thought it was important, it had to be. Packing my things quickly, I left the motel, every nerve on high alert. I had to keep moving, stay one step ahead of whoever was after us. As I drove, I tried to make sense of the clue. Was it a location? A name? A password? It could be anything, but I had to try. Hours turned into days, the road stretching endlessly before me. I stopped only for gas and food, keeping to back roads and avoiding towns as much as possible. Every mile brought new uncertainty, but I couldn't turn back now. Finally, I stumbled upon a small town with a diner called the Crossroads. It was a shabby, forgotten place at the edge of nowhere, and something about it felt right. Maybe this was what Jake meant. I pulled into the parking lot, nerves jangling. The place looked deserted, but I had to check it out. Stepping inside, I was greeted by the smell of stale coffee and old vinyl. A lone waitress eyed me suspiciously, but I ignored her, scanning the room for anything that might stand out. In the far corner was a payphone, an anachronism in this digital age. It seemed out of place, like it was there for a reason. I approached it, heart pounding, and picked up the receiver. To my surprise, there was a dial tone. Taking a deep breath, I dialed Jake's number, the one he'd called from. The phone rang once, twice, then connected. "You found it." Jake's voice crackled through the line, and I felt a rush of relief. "Yeah, I did," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What now?" "You need to listen carefully," he said, his voice low. "They'll do anything to keep their secrets, and they know you're close. But there's a way to end this." I listened as he explained, laying out a plan that was equal parts desperate and dangerous. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. Before he could finish, the door to the diner swung open, and two men walked in, their eyes scanning the room. Panic surged through me. They were here, and they'd found me. "Jake, I have to go," I whispered urgently, hanging up the phone. I slipped out the back door, heart racing, and sprinted for my car. As I drove away, I saw them in the rear-view mirror, emerging from the diner, searching for me. I knew they wouldn't stop until they caught me, but I had something they didn't. Knowledge of their secrets, thanks to Jake. He told me where to find the evidence, and I was determined to get it, to expose them and put an end to this nightmare. The chase was on, a cat and mouse game across the country. I drove through the night, the weight of what I'd learned pressing down on me. Jake had uncovered something big, something that went far beyond Area 51, and it was up to me to finish what he'd started. In the end, I made it to the designated location, a remote, abandoned building in the desert, hidden from view. Inside, I found what Jake had left behind, a cache of documents, photos, proof of the alien project, and the people involved. It was explosive, the kind of evidence that could topple governments. With shaking hands, I gathered everything, determined to get it to someone who could do something about it. It was risky, but I knew it was our only chance at freedom. I was exhausted, terrified, and running on adrenaline, but I had hope now. Hope that I could expose the truth, that Jake's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to fight, to shine a light on the darkness that had consumed our lives. As I drove towards the nearest city, a new sense of determination filled me. We had been warned, yes, but we were also ready to warn others. The truth was out there, and I was going to make sure the world knew it. I ordered Cursed Book of the Deep Web. It really worked. Alright, so let me just start by saying I'm not the type of person who believes in curses or any of that supernatural crap. I'm a pretty skeptical guy, honestly, but what happened to me recently has completely flipped my perspective. It all started when I was browsing the deep web out of sheer boredom. I know, it sounds like the start of every cliched horror story, but hear me out. I had a buddy, Mike, who was always talking about how he'd bought some weird stuff from the dark web, fake IDs, weird collectibles, and even a haunted doll once. Most of it was just junk, of course, but he seemed to get a kick out of it, and curiosity got the better of me one night after a few too many beers. I thought it'd be a laugh to find something spooky and see if it lived up to the hype. So I'm scrolling through all these random marketplaces, finding the usual bizarre stuff like authentic werewolf claws and voodoo dolls. But then I stumbled upon something that caught my eye. The Book of Forgotten Shadows. The description was full of over-the-top warnings like, not for the faint of heart, and contains knowledge that should never be revealed. It was clearly a scam, but the reviews were what got me. People were saying things like, this book changed my life, and it revealed the truth about my existence. The best part was this one dude who claimed it had fixed his life in a way he could never repay. Naturally, I was intrigued. The book was pricey, but I figured, what the hell? It's just money. I ordered it and forgot about it until a couple of weeks later when a package arrived at my door. The box was weirdly heavy and wrapped in some greasy dark paper that left stains on my hands. When I finally tore it open, there it was, a dusty old book with a cover that felt like it was made from rough leather. The title was etched in faded gold letters that glinted in the dim light of my room. Something about the texture made my skin crawl, like it was whispering under my fingers. I'm not gonna lie, there was a part of me that felt uneasy just holding it, but curiosity and a bit of alcohol-induced bravado pushed me forward. I flipped it open, expecting to find blank pages, or maybe some gibberish. But the moment I started reading, a strange sensation washed over me. It was like the room grew colder and time slowed down. The book was filled with cryptic symbols and weird illustrations of twisted figures and dark landscapes that seemed to move if you stared too long. My eyes couldn't tear away from the page, drawn into this twisted, disturbing world. I felt a strange, gnawing sensation in the back of my mind. like something ancient and hungry was watching me, waiting for me to go deeper. The first few pages were just nonsense. Weird phrases like, "The eternal eye sees what's beneath," and "The flesh is a mask for the unwritten truth." But as I read on, the words began to twist into something I could understand. The book spoke of hidden realms and ancient beings that fed on fear and despair. I laughed it off as some edgy goth kid's creative writing project. But then, things started to get real. I'm not entirely sure when it started. Maybe that night, maybe the next day. But I began to notice things that shouldn't be possible. Shadows shifted in the corner of my eyes, shapes that disappeared when I turned to look. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks. But then the dreams began. These weren't your typical nightmares. In my dreams, I was trapped in an endless maze of twisted corridors, pursued by something I could never fully see. It was always there, just behind me, whispering my name in a voice that was mine but twisted, echoing in ways that made my head throb. The walls of the maze were alive, pulsating with a heartbeat that matched my own. The air was thick, suffocating, with the scent of decay. One night, I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a jackhammer. The dream had been particularly vivid, and I could still hear that voice calling to me, urging me to read more. So, like an idiot, I did. That's when things really went off the rails. As I delved deeper into the book, reality started to unravel around me. It was little things at first. Lights flickering when I entered a room, electronics going haywire. Then it escalated. I'd hear footsteps in the hall when I was alone, soft taps on the window, and sometimes I'd see glimpses of figures in reflective surfaces that weren't my own. The worst part was the feeling of being watched, constantly. No matter where I was, I felt eyes on me, boring into my soul. It was suffocating, driving me to paranoia. I started skipping work, avoiding friends, and barricading myself in my room with the book. I couldn't stop reading, no matter how much I wanted to. One night, as I pored over the pages, I felt something shift in the air. It was as if the book had come alive in my hands, its pages vibrating with a sinister energy. I heard a low hum, almost like a chant emanating from the book. The symbols began to glow, casting eerie shadows that danced across my walls. The room felt like it was spinning, reality warping around me as I was pulled into its dark embrace. I woke up on the floor the next morning, the book closed beside me, my body aching like I had been hit by a truck. My phone was flooded with missed calls and worried messages from Mike. I tried to ignore them, but the gnawing fear wouldn't let me. I called him back, told him everything. He was freaked out, told me to get rid of the book, burn it if I had to, but I couldn't. It felt like a part of me, and the thought of destroying it sent a chill down my spine. Over the next few days, the haunting escalated. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was always behind me, just out of sight. My dreams grew more vivid, more terrifying. I was losing my grip on reality, unable to tell what was real and what was in my head. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a whisper, clear and insistent, calling my name from the shadows. It was the same voice from my dreams, coaxing me to return to the book, to embrace the darkness it promised. I knew I had to resist, but something deep within me longed to obey. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. The line between reality and nightmare is blurring, and I fear what will happen if I give in. But I can't shake the feeling that something terrible is coming, something beyond comprehension, and it's all because of that damn book. Alright, so here's where things start to go seriously off the rails. After that last night, when the book's whispering voice got into my head, I knew I had to find some way to get a grip on reality. But how do you fight something that's crawled inside your mind, twisting your thoughts and dreams? I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd barely slept. My room was a mess. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered everywhere. I didn't remember doing any of it, but the book was there, lying open on my desk. The pages seemed to taunt me, daring me to look. So naturally, like an idiot, I picked it up and started reading again. I couldn't help myself. The text was more coherent this time, as if the book was revealing itself to me bit by bit. It was a story about an ancient entity, a godlike being trapped between worlds. It fed on fear, on the desperation of souls caught in the web of its influence. The book described rituals and sacrifices, ways to communicate with it, to bring it closer. I wanted to stop reading, but I felt this pull, like I had to know more. Each page I turned sent a shiver down my spine, filling me with dread and a twisted sort of anticipation. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. That night, I decided to do some research online. I needed to know if anyone else had ever come across this book, or experienced anything like what I was going through. I found forums dedicated to cursed objects and supernatural experiences. I even posted a few messages, hoping someone could give me advice. Most people dismissed it as a joke or a hoax, but a few responded with eerie similarities, shadows lurking just out of sight, dreams that felt like reality, a creeping sense of dread. One guy, who went by the username Shadowseeker, messaged me privately. He claimed to have had an encounter with the same book years ago. His warnings were dire: burn the book, destroy any evidence of its existence, and never speak of it again. But he also mentioned something that chilled me to the bone. He said the book wouldn't let me go easily. It would fight to keep its hold on me, using every fear and weakness against me. I tried to follow his advice. I really did. But when I took the book outside to burn it, the air around me shifted, growing icy cold despite the summer heat. My hands trembled as I held the lighter to the book's edge. The flame sputtered and died, as if snuffed out by an unseen force. No matter what I tried, the book remained unscathed, mocking my attempts to destroy it. The next day, Mike showed up at my door, worried sick. He'd seen my posts online and couldn't just sit by while I went through this alone. He's a good friend like that, always showing up when you need him. We sat in my living room, the book between us, like a dark presence neither of us wanted to acknowledge. "Dude, you look like shit," Mike said, glancing at the book with a mix of fear and fascination. "You need to get rid of this thing." "I tried, man. It's like it won't let me. I feel like it's watching me, even now," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. Mike took a deep breath, then suggested something I hadn't considered: bringing someone in who knew more about this kind of stuff. A paranormal expert or whatever. I was skeptical, but at that point, I was desperate. Anything was worth a shot. We found a local guy, someone who ran a small business dealing with hauntings and cursed objects. He was a bit eccentric, as you'd expect, but he seemed to know his stuff. He came over a few days later, armed with all sorts of gadgets and trinkets, ready to tackle whatever dark force was haunting me. As soon as he walked into my room, he froze. His eyes locked onto the book, and a shadow passed over his face. "This is bad," he muttered. reaching out with a shaking hand to touch it. I've heard of these, but never thought I'd see one. What do you mean? I asked, feeling a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. This is no ordinary cursed book. It's a conduit, a gateway to something far worse than any spirit or ghost. His words sent a shiver down my spine. He explained that the entity tied to the book was ancient, a force beyond human understanding. It thrived on chaos and despair, using the book to bridge the gap between worlds. The expert tried several rituals to sever the connection between me and the book. He burned incense, chanted strange words, and used crystals to cleanse the space. At first, it seemed to work. The air felt lighter, and for a brief moment, I thought I was free. But that night, the dreams returned with a vengeance. The corridors in my nightmares were darker, the whispers louder and more insistent. I saw glimpses of the entity, a shape of shadow and teeth, looking just beyond the veil of my consciousness. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, a mass of darkness that defied form or logic. When I woke, the book was open on my bed, its pages turned to a new section. This part described a ritual to summon the entity fully, to bring it into our world. My hands shook as I read it, and a part of me, a dark, twisted part, wanted to follow through with it. I slammed the book shut, heart pounding in my chest. I knew then that the entity was playing with me, trying to wear me down until I gave into its demands. I could feel its presence growing stronger, feeding on my fear and confusion. Mike stayed over that night, refusing to leave me alone. We barricaded the doors, turned on every light, and sat in the living room with the TV on full blast, trying to drown out the whispers. But they were there, just beneath the surface, a constant hum that gnawed at my sanity. At one point, Mike turned to me, his eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the TV. I nodded, unable to speak. It was a low, rumbling growl, like something huge and monstrous was just outside, waiting for us to slip up. I could feel its eyes on me, burning with hunger and malice. As the night dragged on, I could feel myself slipping, my mind unraveling like a thread being pulled from a sweater. I didn't know how much longer I could hold out, how long I could resist the lure of the book and the entity it promised. I needed a plan, a way to fight back before it was too late. But the more I thought about it, the more hopeless it seemed. This thing was ancient and powerful, and I was just a guy in over his head. In the quiet of the night, as the shadows crept closer and the whispers grew louder, I made a decision. I would fight back, whatever it took. I wasn't going to let this thing win, not without a fight. All right, so here's where things get even crazier. After that hellish night with Mike, I realized that waiting around for the entity to make its move wasn't an option. I had to do something, anything, to break its hold over me. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. The expert's attempt at cleansing the book might not have worked, but it gave me a glimmer of hope. I just needed a better plan. The next day, I reached out to some people from the paranormal forums I joined. One of them, a woman named Sarah, had dealt with similar situations before. She seemed confident that she could help, or at least knew someone who could. She suggested meeting up to discuss a possible solution, and I jumped at the chance. Sarah was in her mid-30s, with an air of calm confidence that was infectious. She didn't flinch when I showed her the book or described the nightmares that had been haunting me. Instead, she listened intently, nodding as if everything made perfect sense. "I've seen this before," she said, tracing a finger over the book's leather cover. "This entity feeds on fear, drawing power from it to manifest. But it can be stopped. How? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. I've tried everything. We need to perform a counter-ritual, something to sever your connection to the book and the entity, she explained. It won't be easy, and there's risk involved, but it's the best shot you've got. She went on to describe a ritual that involved using symbols of protection and light, designed to weaken the entity's hold on me. It sounded complicated and a bit dangerous, but at that point, I was willing to try anything. We gathered the supplies we needed: candles, salt, herbs, and some kind of crystal she swore was crucial to the ritual. The plan was to perform it that night, when the entity's influence would be at its strongest. Mike agreed to help too. I think he felt guilty for getting me into this mess, and he wanted to do whatever he could to help get me out of it. As night fell, we prepared the room, drawing symbols on the floor with chalk and setting up a circle of salt around the perimeter. Sarah had me place the book in the center of the circle, surrounded by candles. The air felt charged, electric with anticipation and fear. We started the ritual, chanting in a language I didn't understand, the words sounding ancient and powerful. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to dance along the walls, writhing and twisting like they were alive. I felt the entity's presence pressing in from all sides, a dark, suffocating force that clawed at my mind. Sarah placed the crystal in my hand, telling me to focus on it, to picture it as a beacon of light and hope. I did my best, closing my eyes and imagining a world where this nightmare didn't exist, where I was free of the book and the terror it had brought into my life. As the ritual progressed, I felt a shift in the air, a subtle change in the entity's presence. It was like the tide was turning, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. But then, everything went sideways. A sudden gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles and scattering the salt. The shadows surged forward, engulfing the room in darkness. I heard a low growl, deep and menacing, echoing from the corners of the room. The entity wasn't backing down without a fight. I was thrown back by an unseen force, crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. My vision swam, and I struggled to focus as the shadows coalesced into a towering figure, eyes burning with malice. It was the entity, manifesting in a way I'd never seen before. It was terrifying, a swirling mass of darkness and teeth, an embodiment of pure fear. Sarah shouted something I couldn't make out, her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind and the growling entity. I clung to the crystal, my knuckles white, focusing all my willpower on the light within. I could feel the entity pushing against me, trying to drag me down into its depths, to consume me whole. Mike, bless his heart, was right there beside me, helping me to my feet. Together, we stood against the entity, our combined wills a shield against its darkness. Sarah continued the chant, her voice rising in strength and determination. The entity shrieked, a sound that pierced through my skull, rattling my bones. But I refused to give in. I could feel the power of the ritual building, a wave of energy that surged through the room, pushing back against the entity's malice. With one final shout, Sarah ended the chant, the words reverberating through the air like a crack of thunder. The entity recoiled, its form flickering and distorting, as if it was being torn apart from the inside. I felt the crystal in my hand grow warm, a pulse of energy that spread through my body, filling me with a warmth and light I hadn't felt in ages. The entity let out one last furious scream before it exploded into a cloud of smoke, dissipating into the air. We stood there in stunned silence, the room eerily quiet in the aftermath of the ritual. The book lay on the floor, its cover smoldering slightly, the pages blackened and charred. "It's over," Sarah said, her voice weary but triumphant. "You're free." I couldn't quite believe it. The weight I'd been carrying for so long had lifted, leaving me feeling lightheaded and exhausted. Mike clapped me on the shoulder, his relief palpable. We'd done it. We'd actually managed to sever the entity's hold on me. But as I looked down at the ruined book, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The entity might have been banished, but I knew it wasn't gone for good. It was out there, waiting for another opportunity, another unsuspecting victim to fall into its trap. For now, though, I was free. Free to reclaim my life and try to move on from this nightmare. It would take time, and a hell of a lot of therapy, but I was determined to make it work. So, even though we completed the ritual, and I felt a lot better, things didn't go back to normal right away. At first, it seemed like the entity was gone, but the after effects lingered like a bad hangover. I wasn't free yet, not entirely. There was this feeling, a nagging suspicion that something was still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment. For the first few days, I felt like I was walking on eggshells, half expecting the entity to show up again. My dreams were mercifully empty, just dark and silent, which was a welcome change after the constant nightmares. But there was still this weird feeling in my gut, like the calm before the storm. Sarah had warned me that the entity might try to come back, that it might leave traces behind. "It's like a parasite," she had said. "You might have removed it, but the scars remain." Great, just what I needed. More creepy metaphors to keep me up at night. But it wasn't just me who was affected. Mike was having a hard time too. He never said it outright, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We'd been through a lot, and the experience had changed both of us. He'd startle at shadows, jump at small noises. It was like we'd been to war, and were still fighting the invisible battles in our heads. Then one night, everything changed. I was sitting alone in my apartment, trying to relax with a video game. The TV cast flickering shadows on the walls, and for a while, I almost forgot about the nightmare that had consumed my life. I was deep into the game when I felt it. A sudden chill in the air, the kind that crawls up your spine and makes your hair stand on end. I paused the game, listening intently. The apartment was silent, too silent, and then I heard it, a faint whisper, like a breath of wind brushing against my ear. It was my name, spoken in a voice that sent shivers through me. My stomach dropped as the fear clawed its way back into my chest. "No," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. "This can't be happening." But it was happening. I could feel it, the same oppressive presence as before, lingering just beyond the edges of my perception. I stood up, backing away from the TV, my heart hammering in my chest. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, coalescing into darker shapes that flickered and swayed. I grabbed my phone and called Sarah, my hands trembling. She picked up on the second ring, her voice a steady anchor in the chaos. "It's back," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I can feel it. What do I do?" "Stay calm," she replied, her tone soothing but firm. "Remember, it's feeding on your fear. You have to fight it." Easier said than done. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, but I knew that wouldn't help. I had to face it, to stand my ground. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and repeated Sarah's words like a mantra. "It feeds on fear. Stay calm. Stay strong." As I stood there focusing on my breathing, I realized something. The shadows weren't just moving, they were converging, forming into a familiar shape. The entity was trying to manifest again, to reclaim its hold on me. But I wouldn't let it. I picked up the charred remains of the book, which I'd kept as a reminder of what I'd been through. Holding it, I felt a surge of defiance. This thing had controlled me for too long, and I was done playing its game. Sarah's voice came through the phone again, grounding me. Use the light, remember? Focus on what you've got, what makes you strong. The crystal we'd used in the ritual was on the table nearby, still faintly warm to the touch. I grabbed it, closing my fingers around it, and felt a comforting warmth spread through me. The shadows recoiled, as if sensing the threat. I began to speak, my voice gaining strength with each word. You don't own me. You never did. Get out. You're not welcome here. The shadows writhed, twisting and curling in on themselves. I could hear the entity's anger, a low growl reverberating through the room. But I kept going, pouring all my anger and fear and defiance into my words. And then, just like that, the shadows burst apart, dissolving into nothingness. The air cleared, and the oppressive weight lifted from my chest. The room was still again, as if nothing had ever happened. I sank to the floor, exhausted but relieved. I'd done it. I'd faced the entity and won, even if it was just a small victory. The fear was still there, lurking in the corners of my mind, but it no longer controlled me. Mike arrived a few minutes later, having gotten my frantic texts. He looked around, taking in the aftermath, and gave me a shaky smile. You did it, man. You really did it. I nodded, trying to process everything. The entity was gone, at least for now. I'd have to stay vigilant to keep my defenses up, but I wasn't alone. I had Mike and Sarah, and the knowledge that I could fight back. As the adrenaline faded, I realized something important. This whole ordeal had taught me that the world was a lot darker and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. But it had also shown me that I had the strength to face it, to stand up against the things that go bump in the night. After that night, I hoped things would finally settle down. The entity was gone, at least for now, and I was determined to rebuild my life. But the experience had left a mark on me, a scar that wouldn't easily fade. I knew I needed to stay vigilant, to be ready in case it ever returned. The first step was getting my life back on track. I returned to work, reconnected with friends, and tried to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. But the shadows of the past lingered, a constant reminder of the darkness I'd faced. I kept the crystal close, a talisman of sorts, its comforting weight, a reminder of my victory. I also kept the charred remains of the book, tucked away in a box in the back of my closet. It felt like a piece of my history, a testament to what I'd overcome. Sarah checked in with me regularly, offering advice and support. She had become a trusted friend, someone who understood what I'd been through. She suggested joining a support group for people who'd experienced the supernatural, and although I was hesitant at first, I decided to give it a shot. The group was small but welcoming, filled with people who had their own stories of encounters with the unknown. Hearing their tales made me realize I wasn't alone in this. Others had faced similar horrors and come out the other side. It gave me hope that I could do the same. A few weeks later, I started noticing small, unsettling things happening around my apartment again. The lights would flicker at odd times, and there was a chill in the air that seemed to follow me from room to room. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, my mind playing tricks on me. But then, I began seeing things out of the corner of my eye. dark shapes that darted away when I turned my head. It was subtle, just enough to unsettle me, to remind me of what I'd faced. I couldn't shake the feeling that the entity was still lurking, waiting for a chance to strike. I reached out to Sarah, desperate for reassurance. She suggested performing a cleansing ritual, something to reinforce the barriers I had put up against the entity. We agreed to meet at my apartment that weekend, to banish whatever remnants remained. When she arrived, she brought a few new items: sage, a small vial of holy water, and a bundle of herbs she claimed would help purify the space. We walked through the apartment, burning the sage and chanting a protective prayer. The air seemed to lighten, the shadows retreating as the cleansing progressed. It was during this ritual that I noticed something I'd missed before: a faint dark stain on the wall in my bedroom, just above where the book had been. It looked like a shadow burnt into the plaster, a lingering reminder of the entity's presence. "That's the residue," Sarah said, her voice serious. "It's like a footprint. We need to get rid of it." She instructed me to sprinkle the holy water over the stain while she chanted a protective spell. As the water hit the wall, the stain began to fade, dissolving into nothingness. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, the last tether to the entity severed. After the ritual, the apartment felt different. The air was lighter, the oppressive feeling gone. I could finally breathe again, free from the entity's grasp. It was over, truly over, and I was grateful for the chance to start anew. In the weeks that followed, I took steps to protect myself from future encounters. I learned more about the supernatural, about how to recognize and combat entities like the one I'd faced. It was empowering, knowing I had the tools to defend myself. Mike and I grew closer through the experience, bonded by our shared ordeal. We'd meet up regularly, keeping each other grounded and sane. He'd become more than just a friend. He was family. Sarah remained a constant in my life, her guidance invaluable as I navigated the aftermath. She taught me how to live with the knowledge of what was out there, how to move forward without fear. One night, as I sat in my apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized something important. The entity might have left its mark, but it hadn't defeated me. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live my life on my own terms. I'd faced the darkness and come out the other side, and now I knew I could handle whatever came my way. The shadows might always be there, lurking in the corners of my mind, but they no longer held power over me. In the end, the curse book had done something unexpected. It had forced me to confront my fears, to find strength in the face of overwhelming odds. And while I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, I knew it had made me who I am today. Life went on, and I embraced it with open arms, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Because if there's one thing I'd learned, it's that we all have our shadows, but it's how we face them that defines us. I found a video of my parents on the dark web being sacrificed. I think I am not a human. So, this is probably going to sound insane, but I swear every word of it is true. It started a few months ago, and ever since, I've been spiraling down a rabbit hole that I can't seem to escape. My life used to be normal, you know? Just your everyday mundane existence. But now I'm questioning everything. It all began on a random Thursday night. I was chilling in my room, scrolling through Reddit and YouTube like I always do. The clock had just ticked past midnight, and the only light in my room came from my laptop screen. I've always been a bit of a night owl, so this was pretty routine for me. At some point, I stumbled upon a thread about the dark web. People were sharing horror stories and bizarre tales, and my curiosity got the better of me. I'd heard about the dark web, of course. Everyone has. But I'd never actually gone exploring. I knew it was a place where illegal activities happened, but I figured that most of the stories were just urban legends. Besides, I was bored, and a little excitement never hurt anyone, right? I followed a few links from the thread, downloaded Tor, and found myself staring at the screen, unsure of where to start. I clicked around, not really knowing what I was looking for. After an hour or so, I found myself in a chat room where people were discussing some pretty disturbing stuff. Most of it seemed like nonsense, but one link caught my attention. It was titled The Gate of Truth. It sounds cliché, but something about that name just drew me in. I hesitated for a moment, but then I clicked the link, and that's when everything changed. The page was simple, almost too simple. It was just a black background with a single video file in the center. There were no comments, no descriptions, just the video. I clicked play. The video quality was grainy, like it had been recorded on an old VHS camcorder. The setting looked like some kind of basement. The walls were made of stone, and there was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows. In the middle of the room, I saw two figures tied to chairs, blindfolded and gagged. My heart dropped into my stomach when I recognized them. It was my parents. I couldn't breathe. I felt my pulse in my ears, and my hands started to tremble. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was frozen, stuck in some sick nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. A man stepped into the frame, wearing a dark robe with a hood that obscured his face. He started speaking in a language I didn't understand, something guttural and harsh. It sounded like a chant. He circled my parents, holding a dagger that glinted under the dim light. I wanted to scream, to reach through the screen and stop him, but I was helpless. The man continued his chant, and soon other figures joined him, all dressed in similar robes. They surrounded my parents, their voices blending into a horrifying symphony. I was on the verge of a panic attack, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Then the camera zoomed in on my mother's face. Her blindfold had slipped just enough for one eye to be visible. She was looking straight at the camera, straight at me, with an expression of terror and despair that I can't even begin to describe. It was like she knew I was watching. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the man with the dagger raised it high above his head. I remember yelling at my screen, pleading for it to stop, but it was useless. The dagger came down and, well, I don't need to describe what happened next. It's burned into my memory, and I can't get it out no matter how hard I try. The video cut to black, and I sat there in stunned silence, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen. It felt like hours before I could move again. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was some sick joke or a movie scene with actors who looked eerily like my parents. But deep down, I knew it was real. I checked my phone to call my parents, hoping for some reassurance, some explanation that made sense. But every call went straight to voicemail. I texted them, desperate for a response, but nothing came back. That night, sleep was impossible. I kept replaying the video in my head, hearing the chants, and seeing my mother's eye staring at me. Through the screen, I needed to find out what had happened, who those people were, and why they had targeted my parents. In the days that followed, I became obsessed. I scoured the dark web for any clue, any hint that could lead me to the truth. I avoided going to the police, afraid of what they might find or think. It wasn't just about my parents anymore. It was about me. The more I dug, the more I uncovered things about my family that didn't add up, secrets they had kept hidden for years. And then I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. References to a cult, one that believed in sacrifices and rituals to summon something beyond this world. Their writings spoke of unholy offspring and the harbinger of change. They believed that some people were not truly human, but rather vessels for something else. That's when the nightmares began, vivid, disturbing dreams, where I was standing in that basement, surrounded by those robed figures, with my parents' blood on my hands. They would chant, calling me by a name I didn't recognize, and in those moments, I felt something inside me stir, something dark and ancient. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection between the cult, my parents, and me. I was terrified of what I might discover, but I knew I couldn't stop now. I had to know the truth, even if it meant confronting the darkest parts of myself. I know this sounds crazy, and maybe it is, but if you're still with me, I promise there's more to this story, and it only gets stranger from here. Stay tuned for part 2, where I delve deeper into the mysteries surrounding my family and the horrifying discoveries that would change everything I thought I knew about myself. I spent the next few days in a haze, barely eating or sleeping. My mind was a storm of thoughts and fears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Paranoia gripped me tightly. Every creak of the house, every shadow that flickered across the walls felt like a threat. I had to keep digging to find something that could make sense of all this madness. I started with my parents' belongings. It felt intrusive, but desperation overrode guilt. In their bedroom, I rummaged through drawers and closets, looking for anything out of the ordinary. That's when I found it. A small, locked box hidden beneath a pile of old clothes. The box was unassuming, covered in dust, as if it hadn't been touched in years. Getting it open wasn't easy, but after what felt like hours of fiddling, the lock finally gave way. Inside, I found a collection of old photographs, a few yellowed letters, and a leather-bound journal. My heart raced as I leafed through the contents. The photos were mostly of my parents, in their younger years, looking carefree and happy. But there were others that stood out. Pictures of unfamiliar places with symbols and markings that sent a chill down my spine. I recognized some of the symbols. They matched the ones I had seen in the cult writings on the dark web. The letters were even more unsettling. They were written in my mother's handwriting, addressed to someone named Eli. I'd never heard of anyone named Eli in our family or among their friends. The letters spoke in cryptic terms about preparations and the child's role. As I read, my hands began to tremble. It was as if my mother was part of something I couldn't even begin to understand. Then there was the journal. Its pages were filled with notes and sketches, mostly in my father's handwriting. The entries were a jumble of thoughts, some of them bordering on incoherent, but a few pages caught my eye. References to the same cult I had discovered online, and details of rituals and ceremonies that made my stomach turn. One passage was particularly haunting. Tonight is the night of the blood moon. The others have been summoned, and the child will soon understand their true nature. The prophecy speaks of transformation, and we must be ready for the change. Eli assures us that the sacrifice is necessary to protect us from what lies beyond. What the hell did that mean? What prophecy? And why did they keep referring to the child? I felt like I was reading the script of a horror movie, not the diary of my father. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I decided to reach out to the only family member I still trusted, my Aunt Sarah. She lived a few states away, but we had always been close. She was the kind of person who could see through lies and bullshit, and I hoped she could help me make sense of this. When I called her, I tried to keep my voice steady, but I was a mess inside. Aunt Sarah, I began, trying to hold back the panic. I need to talk to you. It's about Mom and Dad. Something's wrong. There was a pause on the line, and I heard her draw in a deep breath. Honey, what happened? Are you okay? I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal over the phone. I found some things that don't make sense. I think they're in trouble, or they were involved in something dangerous. She listened patiently as I spilled out the whole story. The dark web video, the journal, the letters, everything. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate. Listen to me carefully, she said finally, her voice low and serious. Pack your bags and come to my house. I'll help you figure this out, but we need to be cautious. Don't talk to anyone else, and don't trust anyone until we know more. Can you do that? I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Oh, I'll be there as soon as I can. As I packed a bag with essentials, my mind kept returning to the journal's final words. There was a part of me that wanted to believe it was all a sick joke or some elaborate prank, but another part, the part that had seen that video and felt its truth, knew better. The drive to Aunt Sarah's was a blur. The roads seemed to stretch on forever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every car that lingered behind me too long felt like a threat, and I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see one of those robed figures staring back at me. When I finally arrived at her house, Aunt Sarah was waiting on the porch. She hugged me tightly, and for the first time in days, I felt a little bit of relief. But it was short-lived. We went inside, and I handed her the box, watching as she went through its contents with the same sense of disbelief that I had felt. It's worse than I thought, she said, looking up from the journal with a grim expression. Your parents were involved in something dangerous, something they couldn't control. I felt a lump in my throat. Do you know what it is? Who's Eli? And what does this mean about me? Aunt Sarah sighed, closing the journal carefully. I think Eli was the leader of this cult, or at least someone very important in it. Your parents were probably drawn in by promises of power or protection. As for you, the child they mention, I think they were talking about you. But why, I don't know yet. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. What did the cult want with me? And why had my parents been willing to go along with it? We need to be careful, she continued. If they're watching you, they might come looking for you, especially if they think you're a part of their plans. The gravity of the situation hit me hard. I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. My parents had been involved with something dark, and now it was up to me to unravel the mystery before it was too late. That night, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were filled with the same nightmare. A dark figure standing at the foot of my bed, whispering words I couldn't understand. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, convinced that the figure was real. As I lay there in the dark, I knew that finding out the truth about my parents and the cult was only the beginning. Whatever they had been involved in, it wasn't over yet, and I had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. I had to keep going to find out what had really happened to my parents and why I was so important to this cult. The answers were out there, hidden in the shadows, and I was determined to uncover them, no matter what it took. Aunt Sarah's house became my sanctuary, a place where I could start piecing together the nightmare puzzle my life had become. With her help, I began to unravel the layers of secrecy that had surrounded my family for years. But every answer we found only led to more questions, and the shadows that haunted me seemed to grow darker with each revelation. We spent the next few days going through the journal and letters meticulously. Sarah was methodical, cross-referencing the symbols and names we found with online databases and libraries of ancient texts. It felt like detective work, but instead of chasing criminals, we were chasing shadows and whispers. One afternoon, while Sarah was at the local library trying to track down more information about the cult, I decided to dig deeper into the dark web. I was terrified of what I might find, but I needed to know more about the Gate of Truth website and its connection to the cult. As I delved deeper, I stumbled upon a forum dedicated to conspiracy theories and the occult. Buried within threads of rambling nonsense, I found a post from someone claiming to have knowledge about the cult my parents were involved with. They called themselves The Watcher and claimed to have inside information. The post was cryptic, filled with warnings about awakenings and the true purpose of the vessel. I messaged them immediately, hoping they would respond. It was a shot in the dark, but it was all I had. To my surprise, the Watcher replied within minutes, asking me to meet them in a private chat room. My heart pounded as I accepted the invitation, unsure of what I was getting myself into. The chat room was eerily silent, save for the sound of my own breathing. The Watcher was already there, waiting. The messages appeared on the screen, one by one, like messages from a ghost. The Watcher, I know why you're here. You're seeking the truth about the cult and your family. Me. Yes, I need to know what happened to my parents and why they're targeting me. The Watcher, your parents were part of the Order of the Crimson Dawn. They believed in the prophecy of the Harbinger. Me. What is the Harbinger? The Watcher. The Harbinger is not what you think. It's not a person or an entity, but a catalyst for change. Your parents believed you were the Harbinger, destined to bring about a new era. My stomach churned as I read their words. The idea that I was somehow connected to this cult's beliefs made my skin crawl. I felt like a pawn in some twisted game I didn't understand. Me. What does that mean? Why do they think I'm the Harbinger? The Watcher. The cult believes that you possess a unique connection to the other side. They think you can open the gate between worlds, allowing them to commune with the forces beyond. They've been waiting for you to come of age to fulfill your role in their ritual. It was like a punch to the gut. The Watcher's explanation fit with everything I had found in the journal, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. I had always felt different, like I didn't quite belong, but I never imagined it was because I was supposedly some kind of mystical key. Me. What happened to my parents? Are they still alive? The Watcher. I don't know. The Order is secretive, and they eliminate anyone who threatens their plans. If they believed your parents betrayed them, they wouldn't hesitate to act. But they still need you. You're too important to their cause. The conversation sent shivers down my spine. I thanked the watcher and logged off, feeling more isolated and vulnerable than ever. I had hoped for answers, but all I had found were more reasons to be afraid. When Aunt Sarah returned, I shared what I had learned. She listened intently, her expression growing more serious with every word. "We need to find a way to keep you safe," she said finally. "If what the Watcher said is true, the cult won't stop until they find you." We decided to dig into the history of the Order of the Crimson Dawn, hoping to find something that could help us. Sarah suggested reaching out to a friend of hers, a historian who specialized in obscure religious groups. He was reluctant at first, but when Sarah mentioned the name of the cult, he agreed to meet us. His name was Dr. Michael Graves, a wiry man with a sharp mind and a love for the macabre. We met him in his dusty office at the university, surrounded by stacks of books and ancient artifacts. He listened carefully as we explained our situation, nodding thoughtfully. "I've heard of the Order of the Crimson Dawn," he said, rubbing his chin. "They're a secretive group, known for their fascination with the occult and apocalyptic prophecies. Most historians dismiss them as harmless eccentrics, but there have been rumors of darker activities." Dr. Graves pulled out a thick tome and flipped through its pages, showing us illustrations of the symbols we had found. "These are ancient sigils used in rituals to summon and bind entities from other planes of existence. If the cult believes in these rituals, they might be more dangerous than we thought." His words were both reassuring and terrifying. At least now we knew we were dealing with something real, but that also meant the danger was real too. As we left his office, I felt a mix of fear and determination. We were getting closer to the truth, but every step forward felt like it was pulling me deeper into the darkness. That night, I had another dream. I was standing in a vast, empty field under a blood-red moon. The air was thick with whispers, and I felt drawn towards a circle of stones in the distance. As I approached, I saw figures in robes, their faces obscured by shadows. They were chanting, calling my name over and over. I felt a pull, a compulsion to join them. I woke up gasping, my heart racing. I knew it was only a dream, but it felt so real. The whispers lingered in my mind, like an echo that wouldn't fade. The next morning, I found Aunt Sarah already awake, sipping coffee at the kitchen table. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with concern. "I've been thinking," she said. "If the cult believes you're important to their plans, maybe we can use that to our advantage. We could set a trap, lure them out into the open." Her suggestion was risky, but it was the best plan we had. We needed to find out who was behind the cult and what they wanted with me. It was time to stop running and start fighting back. We spent the day preparing, setting up surveillance equipment, and contacting people we could trust. The Watcher had agreed to help, providing us with information about the cult's activities and potential meeting places. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I was ready to face the cult and find out the truth about my parents and myself. Whatever happened, I knew I couldn't do it alone. I had Aunt Sarah by my side, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. The day of the confrontation was suffocatingly tense. Aunt Sarah and I had spent the previous night going over every detail of the plan, double-checking our equipment, and contacting the Watcher for any last-minute intel. It felt like preparing for a battle, and in a way, it was. The watcher had identified a location where the cult was rumored to gather, a decaying mansion on the outskirts of the town, hidden behind thick woods and a rusty old gate. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see in a horror movie, and just thinking about going there made my skin crawl. We decided to make our move at night. Aunt Sarah and I drove in silence, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on us. The roads were empty, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything around us. When we arrived, the mansion loomed ahead like a monstrous shadow, its windows dark and hollow. We parked the car a distance away and approached on foot, our nerves stretched to the breaking point. Every snap of a twig underfoot echoed in the stillness, setting my heart racing. We crept around the back, hoping to find a way in without alerting anyone inside. The back door was old and rotting, and with a bit of force, it creaked open. We stepped inside, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The mansion was a maze of corridors and empty rooms, each more unsettling than the last. Our footsteps echoed off the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept expecting to see one of those robed figures lurking in the shadows, but the place seemed deserted. Finally, we found what we were looking for, a stairway leading down to the basement. I knew from the video that this was where the cult performed their rituals. The thought of going down there made my stomach turn, but I steeled myself and followed Aunt Sarah. The basement was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. Symbols were etched into the stone walls, the same ones I had seen in my father's journal. At the center of the room stood an altar, stained with what looked like dried blood. The sight of it made my blood run cold. Suddenly, we heard voices coming from a doorway at the far end of the room. We ducked behind a pillar, our hearts pounding in our chests. I peered out, watching as a group of robed figures entered, their faces hidden by shadowy hoods. They were chanting softly, their words echoing ominously through the basement. One of them stepped forward, a tall figure with a commanding presence. He lowered his hood, revealing a face I recognized from the photographs in the box. Eli, the leader of the cult, the man my parents had corresponded with. Eli began speaking in a language I didn't understand, his voice low and resonant. The other cult members responded in kind, their voices blending into a haunting melody. I felt a strange sensation creeping over me, like an invisible hand pressing down on my chest. As we watched, Aunt Sarah nudged me and pointed to a figure in the shadows, tied to a chair near the altar. My heart skipped a beat when I realized it was my father. He looked gaunt and exhausted, but he was alive. Relief washed over me, mixed with a surge of anger at what they had done to him. We had to act fast. I whispered to Aunt Sarah, and we agreed on a plan. She would create a distraction, giving me a chance to get to my father and get him out of there. It was risky, but we didn't have any other choice. Aunt Sarah grabbed a nearby piece of metal and threw it across the room, where it clattered loudly against the stone floor. The cult members turned toward the noise, their chanting faltering. Taking advantage of the moment, I darted out from behind the pillar and rushed to my father's side. His eyes widened in surprise as I started untying him, but he didn't say a word. I could hear the cult members shouting, and I knew our time was running out. My hands shook as I worked the knots free, but finally, he was loose. "Can you walk?" I whispered urgently. He nodded, his voice hoarse. "I think so." We moved quickly, heading back toward the stairs. I could hear Aunt Sarah shouting, drawing the cult members' attention away from us. We reached the stairs, just as she caught up, breathless but unharmed. "Let's go," she urged, pushing us forward. We raced up the stairs and out of the mansion, not daring to look back. The night air hit us like a shock, and we ran through the woods, adrenaline fueling our every step. My mind was a whirl of fear and determination. There was no turning back now. We reached the car, and Aunt Sarah floored it, speeding away from the mansion and the horrors it held. As the distance between us and the cult grew, I finally let myself breathe, relief mixing with the lingering terror. My father sat silently in the back seat, his eyes distant and haunted. I knew he had been through hell, and there were still so many questions I needed to ask him. But for now, we were safe, and that was all that mattered. Back at Aunt Sarah's house, we settled into the living room, exhausted but relieved to be out of danger. My father's voice was shaky as he began to speak, revealing the truth behind the cult and their obsession with me. The Order of the Crimson Dawn believed in the Harbinger prophecy, he explained, his eyes clouded with regret. Your mother and I were drawn in, convinced that we were protecting you from something worse. We didn't realize how deep their beliefs went until it was too late. He paused, taking a shaky breath. They think you're the key to opening a gate to another realm, a realm where they believe they'll find power and immortality. Your mother and I tried to leave, but they found us. They needed you, and they wouldn't let us go. His words left me reeling. The idea that I was somehow connected to this otherworldly power was overwhelming, but it also explained so much. The dreams, the feelings of being watched, it all made a twisted kind of sense. What do we do now? I asked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. We have to stop them, Aunt Sarah said firmly. They're not going to give up, not after all this. But now that we know their plans, we can fight back. I nodded, a newfound determination filling me. The cult had taken so much from us, but we still had a chance to end this once and for all. The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. With the truth out in the open, we knew the cult wouldn't rest until they got what they wanted. But we also knew that we couldn't keep running forever. We had to confront them and put an end to their twisted plans. Aunt Sarah reached out to some trusted friends, people with experience dealing with dangerous situations. They arrived at her house with a quiet determination, ready to help us face whatever lay ahead. We spent hours discussing strategies, trying to anticipate the cult's moves and outmaneuver them. The Watcher continued to provide valuable information, confirming that the cult was regrouping and planning another ritual. This time, they intended to finish what they had started, and they would stop at nothing to capture me. As we finalized our plans, a sense of resolve settled over me. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was tempered by a fierce determination to protect my family and stop the cult from causing any more harm. The showdown was set for the night of the blood moon, a symbolic time for the cult's rituals. We knew they would gather at the mansion again, using its dark history and isolation to their advantage. It felt like the final act of a nightmare, but I was ready to face it head on. On the night of the blood moon, we drove back to the mansion, our hearts pounding with anticipation. The sky was a deep crimson, casting an eerie glow over everything. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. We parked a short distance away, moving quietly through the woods toward the mansion. This time, we weren't alone. Aunt Sarah's friends flanked us, armed and ready to confront the cult. As we approached, We could hear the low hum of chanting coming from the basement. It was a haunting sound, one that sent chills down my spine. But instead of fear, I felt a surge of determination. We were going to stop them. We entered the mansion through the same back door, the smell of decay hitting us like a wall. The place was as dark and foreboding as ever, but we pushed forward, moving quickly and quietly toward the basement. When we reached the basement stairs, we could see the cult gathered around the altar, their hoods casting shadows over their faces. Eli stood at the center, his voice rising above the others as he led the chant. The air was thick with tension, the atmosphere charged with an unsettling energy. We moved into position, our presence hidden by the darkness. Aunt Sarah's friends had set up equipment to disrupt the ritual. Flashbangs and smoke bombs designed to create chaos and confusion. At Aunt Sarah's signal, we sprang into action. The flashbangs went off with blinding intensity, filling the room with deafening noise and disorienting light. The cult members stumbled back, their chants faltering as confusion spread through their ranks. We charged forward, taking advantage of the chaos to reach the altar. I could see Eli trying to rally his followers, his voice rising in anger, but we were ready for him. Aunt Sarah's friends quickly subdued the cult members, their years of experience and training proving invaluable. I moved toward Eli, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anger. This was the man who had manipulated my parents, who had tried to use me for his twisted ends. "You can't stop what's meant to be," Eli shouted, his voice a mix of defiance and desperation. "The Harbinger will open the gate, and we will ascend." "No," I said, my voice steady, despite the fear swirling inside me. "You're not going to use me for your sick plans. This ends now." Eli lunged at me, his eyes wild with zealotry. But before he could reach me, one of Aunt Sarah's friends intercepted him, subduing him with swift precision. It was over in moments, the cult's power broken, their plans shattered. As the smoke cleared and the chaos subsided, a sense of relief washed over me. The cult had been stopped, their ritual disrupted, and their leader captured. The nightmare was finally coming to an end. With the cult members restrained, we called the authorities, handing them over to face justice for their crimes. It was a long night of questions and explanations, but eventually we were able to leave, the weight of the ordeal slowly lifting from our shoulders. In the weeks that followed, life began to return to some semblance of normalcy. My father was recovering, slowly regaining his strength and sense of self after his ordeal with the court. We stayed with Aunt Sarah, grateful for her unwavering support and strength throughout the nightmare. The Watcher continued to check in, their presence a comforting reminder that we weren't alone. They had played a crucial role in helping us, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for their mysterious guidance. As for me, I was left with the knowledge of my supposed connection to the Harbinger prophecy. It was a part of my past, a shadow that would always linger, but it didn't define me. I was more than the cult's twisted beliefs, more than the darkness they had tried to use me for. In time, I began to heal, to reclaim my life from the shadows that had threatened to consume it. I knew there would always be questions, lingering doubts about who I was and what my future held, but I also knew that I had the strength to face whatever came next. The mansion stood empty now, its secrets laid bare, its power broken. It was a symbol of the past, a reminder of the darkness that had been vanquished. And as I looked toward the future, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that we could create our own destinies, free from the chains of prophecy and fear. And so, the story comes to an end, a tale of darkness and redemption, of facing fears and overcoming them. It was a journey I hadn't chosen, but one that had shaped me in ways I could never have imagined. And as I looked back on it all, I knew that whatever lay ahead, I was ready to face it.